Hello coders, and welcome to the final part of this HTML, CSS and JavaScript project. We are building a tip calculator, and today we're going to be focusing on the JavaScript functionality of this form. This is a very beginner-friendly course, and all of the course code is available in the show notes below. Okay, let's get into the code. Before I dive into this JavaScript file, let's first show what the actual application does and looks like. So I'm going to open up the index.html and we're going to load Chrome. So this is the calculator, and we can see that we have these three inputs here. We created this in the previous tutorials in this course. There was a tutorial focusing specifically on the HTML markup and then another one on the CSS. What we're doing today is we're going to create the JavaScript code that makes the calculations when the form is submitted. So for example, if I was to have a bill of 100 with a tip amount of 20%, and I want to split this against two people, press calculate, we can see that the calculations are made below. So the total bill comes to 120 because 20% of 100 is 20, and therefore total per person is 60. Let's change this to an odd number. So let's say, for instance, I want the tip amount to be 30 and perhaps the bill was 150. Press calculate, and we can see that it changes to 180, that's the total bill, 45 is the tip amount, and it's 90 per person. So the JavaScript reads these values when the form is submitted, and then it does a calculation and it populates these disabled fields below. So let's get into the JavaScript. Once you download the code, you'll have a zip file called JS tip calculator and then the version number .zip. If you unzip this file, you'll see that you have an index.html, a readme, and an src. In the src folder, you'll have a calculator.js file. This is what we're going to be recreating today. I'm going to close the dist folder, and what I'm going to do is work within our src folder, because what I want to do is recreate this into our own application. So let's open up the src folder and create a new file and call this calculator.js. Once we have the new file created, I'm just going to pop this over here. I'm going to right click and then go split vertically. This means that we have the old calculator.js file here. This is what we're going to recreate, and this is our new file in the right hand side. So I can get rid of this file like so. Now, the first thing I need to do is actually link up this new JavaScript file to our HTML. So let's just open up the HTML, for instance, and scroll down right to the bottom. So within the body, but the last thing in the body, what I want to do is link to this new JavaScript file. So I'm going to do a script tag. And this script tag is going to have an src. This is the source attribute. And we're going to go to src / and then our new calculator.js file. We need to provide a type, and this is going to be application JavaScript. And we're going to close this script tag. Notice that this IDE here that I'm using, PHP Storm, has automatically closed this with a closing tag. Now, the reason why this is at the bottom of the body instead of at the head alongside the style sheet is because the DOM, the document object model, needs to be created in the browser before we can handle the form fields. So that actually didn't do anything to our application. All we're doing is linking to the JavaScript file. But this means that we can actually play with that JavaScript file and add some bits and pieces to that, which will change the behavior of the application. So I'm going to just remove the structure on the left hand side here just to give me some more room. And what I'm going to do is just close down the index.html file. To test that this JavaScript file is actually linked to our application, I'm going to write alert and then hello world. Press save. And then what I need to do is open up the index.html and then run this in Chrome. This is because the previous one we had was running the old code. And as we can see, we have this message, hello world. This is the alert that we have just created. So I'm going to press OK on this, and then it renders that page. So now we've connected our external JavaScript file to this application, we can start working on the form interactions. So let's go back into the code. Again, I'm going to close index.html. Let's just close down the structure again, just to give me a little bit more room. And we can see in the dist calculator.js that we have a constant here. This is const form is equal to get element by ID calculator. So we're going to create the constant. This means that this form will never change, which is correct because the calculator won't change itself. And we're grabbing the element by its ID. So let's go and type this out here. Const form is equal to document.get element by ID and then calculator. Let's just remove this alert. And what this is doing is it's grabbing that form element by its ID. And we can test this out by typing console.log and then passing in that constant, which is form. Press save and then go back to the browser. Refresh your browser to load the new changes to the JavaScript. And what I'm going to do is go to View and then Developer and then Developer Tools. Now this browser is Chrome, but the other browsers as well, such as Safari and Firefox, they all have their own inbuilt developer tools, which you'll be able to use to see this debug. And the thing that we're focusing on here is this element. This is what we've added to the console. So we're in the console part here. And we can see that we've plucked out this form element. And we've plucked it out by its ID, which is calculator. If I was to click on this element selector here, I could go through the whole DOM and I could target specific elements. So for example, these are the form elements. This is the input element with the ID of %. But we want to be focusing on the form, which is what we've got here. Now we've grabbed this form element and assigned it to that constant. We can start working within the form events when they are triggered. In particular, we're going to be focusing on the onSubmit event. This is the event that is fired when the form is submitted. So once again, let's go back into the code. As we can see in the example code, what we're doing here is we're calling form.onSubmit and we're equaling that to a function, passing in an event. So this is the function that's called when the form is submitted. Let's include that to our JavaScript. So form.onSubmit. And again, the form is the constant that we assigned up here. So form.onSubmit, we're going to equal that to a function and we're going to pass in an event to that function. And what we're going to do in this function is manipulate that event. In particular, what we're going to do is type event.prevent default. This is because we want to prevent it from actually submitting and refreshing the page. So not only do we need to do event.prevent default, but we also need to return false. I'm also going to remove this console log and I'm going to put it in between the event.prevent default and the return false here. This means that this console log will only appear when the form is submitted. And we can try that out. Let's save the work and go back to the browser. Make sure to refresh the page to load the new JavaScript and you can see the console log has disappeared. But it will reappear once we submit the form. So let's type 100 into here. Let's put 20 into there and then just press calculate. And now we can see that we have this console log. And if I was to press calculate again, we'll get another console log here and there and there. So now we've got control of this onSubmit event. What we can do is grab the other values from these input fields and then make the calculations. So let's go back into the code. We want to grab the elements by the IDs of bill, percentage, and customer number. So let's just grab all of those and paste them in here. What I'm going to do now is type console.log and I'm going to supply how much to the console log. and we're going to copy this here and here. The second one will be the tip amount, and the third one will be the customer number. Let's save our work once more and then go back into the browser. Refresh the page and then submit the form again. So I'm going to put in 100 and we're going to put in 20 and then press calculate. Now we've been able to pull out the elements by the IDs of bill, percentage, and customer number. Now we've got access to these form fields. We can pull out their values. Again, let's go back into the code. I'm just going to skip over these variables and we're going to take a look at these variables. What we're doing is we're handling the value of these form elements and we're converting them to various data types. For example, the cost has been parsed to a float and the customer number has been parsed to an integer. So let's add those in. What I'm going to do is type let cost. We're going to create the cost variable and we're going to equal that to parse int, and we're going to supply how much dot value. And this value is the value that is submitted to that how much element, which is the bill. So let's type value in here. We're also going to create another variable, and this is to do with the customer amount. We'll give this variable the name of customers, and this time the element is going to be customer number. We need to change the cost from parse int to parse float, but we're going to keep the customers as an integer. Integers are whole numbers, and of course you can't have half a person paying your bill. I'm going to grab these console outputs here and we're going to paste them below. We're going to replace how much with cost, and we're going to replace customer number with customers. The tip amount is an interesting one because this is actually an optional field. You don't have to supply a tip for this calculator to work, which means that the value of the tip amount will be empty. And to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is supply the tip amount dot value to this output. Let's save our work and go back into the browser once more. Refresh the page again, and then let's apply 100 and then just press calculate, not supplying a tip amount. So here we can see the cost is 100. We can see the customer amount is 1, but we don't have anything at all for the tip amount. Now this obviously isn't an integer, it's not a number, so how do we handle that? We can't parse this to an int because there isn't a value to parse, and we will get the error not a number. Let's go into the code and I'll demonstrate that. Let's just clear some of these lines, and then I'm going to do parse int of the tip amount. Press save and then go back into the browser. Refresh the page again, and then let's supply 100 and then press calculate. The value we get now is NaN. This stands for not a number. This means that we need to supply a check for this value before we parse it to any kind of data type. So let's go back into the code and check that a value of the tip amount was actually supplied. So what I'm going to do between these variables and the logging is I'm going to supply an if statement. So if tip amount dot value is not an empty value, then I'm going to say percentage is equal to the parse int of tip amount dot value. Now we need to create the percentage variable. So we'll put this here. Let's type let and then percentage, and we're going to assign that a default value of 0. What I'm going to do now is copy this variable and we're going to paste it in here. So now the percentage will always be 0 unless there is a tip amount value. And if there is, then the percentage will be the integer of that value. So let's go back to the code and demonstrate this. Refresh your work and then type in 120 and press calculate. Now we can see that the percentage amount is set to 0, even though a value hasn't been supplied. Let's add a value to the tip amount now. Let's say 50%. Press calculate, and we'll see a second output here where the tip amount, the percentage, is 50. Now we've managed to access the form values of these three elements, the bill, the tip amount, and the number to split. We can now start creating the calculations for the results. So let's go back into the code. We need to do three calculations. The first one is the total percentage. This is the total amount of that percentage of the tip that you've supplied. The second one is the total bill. This is the percentage plus the total cost. And of course, we have to do the calculation per customer. So let's start creating some functions for those. I'm going to scroll down here and we're going to type function calculate percentage increase. This is going to take two values. The first one is the cost and the second one is the percentage. What we're going to do is return the calculation of cost divided by 100. That's going to get 1% and then multiply this by the percentage that was given. And remember, the percentage could either be 0 or it could be an integer. We're going to change this from calculate percentage increase to calculate percentage amount. And what I'm going to do within the onSubmit function here is we're going to create a console.log and we're going to pass in the text results. And then we're going to grab that again, paste it underneath. And this is going to be our percentage amount. Let's go and create this variable. So let's type let and then percentage amount is equal to the return of calculate percentage amount, passing in the cost variable that we created before and the percentage as well. Okay, let's press save and then go into the browser. Refresh the page to reload the JavaScript. Let's put in the bill amount. Let's say that's 100. Let's press calculate and we'll see that the results are 0. Let's change that to 30. So that's 30% tip. Press calculate and we can see that we have 30 here because 30% of 100 is 30. So let's change this to something a little bit more interesting. Let's say, for instance, this was 135. Press calculate. We can now see that the percentage is 40.5. Let's go back to the code and start working on the other calculations. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just add a string to this. So I'm going to supply percentage amount. And the next calculation we're going to do is we're going to calculate the total value. So let's create another function. This is going to be called calculate total value. And we're going to supply the cost and the percentage. This calculation is going to return the cost plus that percentage. Let's change this to be percentage amount so we don't confuse ourselves with the original percentage value. So let's change that to be percentage amount and percentage amount there. So what we're going to do is calculate the total value based on the percentage amount that we've got from here and the cost that we've had before. So what I'm going to do is copy these two lines. Let's just drag this out to make a little bit more room so we can see what we're doing. Let's paste this underneath. Let's change this to total value, and we're going to assign this the return of our new calculate total value function. We need to supply the cost and the percentage amount. And of course, we need to supply the total value to the output as well. Let's press save and then go back into the browser. Refresh the page again and let's type in 100. Let's provide the tip amount of 20 and then press calculate. So we can see the percentage amount is 20 and we can see the total value is 120. And this is because it's cost plus this calculation. Let's change this to 150 and then press calculate. We can see the total value is 180 because 20% of 150 is 30. The final calculation that we need to do is to calculate this bill per person. So let's go back to the code and add that calculation in. If we scroll up here, we can see that we're doing calculate per person. This is taking the cost, this is taking the percentage, and the customers. So let's create that function down here. This will take the total value, and what we could do is just supply the amount of customers that we want to divide this between, because we've already worked out the total value because that's the calculation before. So let's just supply the customers. In the body, let's do a return, and this is going to be the calculation of total value divided by the customers. Let's scroll up here. What I'm going to do is copy this and paste it below. Let's change this variable to be total per customer, and we're going to change this variable assignment to the output of our calculate per customer call. We're going to supply the total value, which we've got from here, and the number of customers that we have here. Let's change the output. Let's copy that and paste that in there, and change this to say total per customer. Press save and then go back into the browser and refresh. Again, let's submit this form. I'm going to put in 100. Let's just only supply one customer. Let's press calculate. So we can see that this one customer needs to pay the whole bill, which is 100. Let's provide a percentage amount. Let's do 20. Let's press calculate. So now the total per customer is the total value, which is 120. Let's add another customer to this. Let's say that we want to have 2 customers. Press calculate, and we can see that the total per customer is divided by the amount of customers that we've supplied. Let's change this up to, let's say, 5. Let's press calculate, and the total per customer here is 24. Let's put in some odd numbers. So let's say that this was 112. Let's say that this was 3, and calculate. We can see here that the percentage amount is a float, and it's got a huge amount of decimal places behind it. And the total per customer is 23.072. Let's see if we can do some rounding to round all of this up. So let's go back into the code. What I'm going to do is round the total value. So let's scroll down here to this function. I'm going to type math.round, and we're going to supply the calculation, which is cost plus percentage amount. We're going to round it at this point. Let's press save, and then let's get back into the browser. Refresh the page, and then let's supply 100 and then calculate. That's perfectly fine. Let's change this to 120 with the tip amount of 3 and the number to split of 5. Let's press calculate, and we can see that the total value is 124. That's because we've rounded up the calculation of the percentage amount and also the cost. Let's also round the percentage amount as well, and let's just copy this into this function. So we're rounding the percentage amount and we're rounding the total value. Let's press save and then go back into the browser. Refresh, and then let's add those interesting figures again. So 120. The tip amount is 3, and the number to split is 5. Let's press calculate. Now we have a rounded amount. So the percentage amount is 4. The total value is 124, and the total per customer, therefore, is 24.8. So now we have our calculations. What we need to do is put these values into these disabled form fields. So this would be the total value, this would be the percentage amount, and this would be the total per customer. Like how we've managed to pull out the values from these inputs, we can add values to these inputs. So let's go back into the code and start doing that. What I'm going to do is scroll up back to this onSubmit event here. What we need to do is pull out the elements of those disabled form fields. And these elements are here. So total bill, total percentage, and total per customer. What I'm going to do is just copy all of this and paste it into our example. What I need to do is change this variable because it's used above here. Let's say, for instance, this is total per person, and we'll copy that in like so. Okay, now we've got these values, we can now assign them to their relevant disabled fields. And those fields are these fields that we've got up here. Let's work on the total percentage first. So what we're going to do is type total percentage dot value is equal to percentage amount. Let's remove this output, and let's also do the same for the total value, which is total bill dot value is equal to the total value calculation. And finally, let's do the total per customer. So let's type total per customer dot value is equal to the total per person. Let's also remove this output here and also the output above. Let's quickly recap what we've done. We've pulled out these form fields, the bill, the percentage, and the customer number, and we've assigned these to those variables. We've also done this with the disabled fields as well, so total bill, total percentage, and total customer. We've played around with the values of these by setting them to floats and integers, and we've also handled the fact that we might have an empty value with the tip amount. And finally, we've made these three calculations. This one calculates the percentage amount, this is the total value, and this is the total value per person. So let's press save and then go back into the browser and see how this changes the form. After you've refreshed your page, supply some more values to this form. I'm just going to supply 100. Let's press calculate, and we can see now that we have the output in this result. So we have total bill is 100 and total per person is 100. And notice the tip total is 0. Let's go and change that. Let's supply a tip amount of 20%. Press calculate again, and we can see that the total bill comes to 120. The tip amount is 20, and therefore per person we have to pay 120. Let's change this to be 3 people. Let's calculate that again, and we can see that the total per person goes down to 40. Let's supply 120 with the tip amount of 3 and the number to split of 5. This was the interesting calculation that we did before. Press calculate, and now we can see that the total bill is 124. The tip amount is 4, and therefore the total per person is 24.8. The next thing I'm going to do is go back into our JavaScript code and tidy it up. Let's just remove the example calculator.js. This is now our working version. Let's scroll up to the top. What I'm going to do is provide some comments, and here I'm going to type the form submit event handler. I'm going to change these to constants rather than variables because these elements will never change. Let's scroll down a little bit further. What else can we do? So this needs to be a variable because it could be 0 or it could be an integer. We're also going to keep these as variables as 2 because these are from the element values. This is the calculation part down here. So we can do a couple of things here. Notice that my IDE has picked this out as a redundant variable. It's not used anywhere else apart from here, which means that we can copy this and paste it in here and remove this line below. What we're doing is we're directly setting the total per customer dot value to this calculate per customer result. Okay, let's tidy up these function calls. What we're going to do is supply this on the same line, and we're going to add some comments, and this is going to say calculate percentage amount. We'll change these parameters to have the data type of number, and we'll go down to the next one here. Let's give this some comments, and this is going to be calculate the total value. And again, we're going to supply the data types here, which is number and number. The next one is going to be very similar to the last two. This is going to say calculate the total per customer. Again, we're going to supply a number to both the customers and the total value parameters. Let's do a quick recap of the whole code. So let's scroll up to the top. What we have here is our constant. This is the form element that we've pulled out by getElementById. We then create a function for the onSubmit event. We prevent the event's defaults, and then we pull out these elements from the form. After that, we handle the values from those form elements, and we also change the percentage depending on whether or not it has been supplied. And finally, we make those calculations. Now, this is in the calculator.js file. If I was to open up the structure here, we can see that we have the style.css. This is what we worked on in the previous tutorial. And of course, we have the index.html file here. All of this code is available. It's in the link in the show notes below. Let's just quickly check that those changes haven't screwed up this application. Let's go back into the browser. Refresh your page, and then let's fill this out once more. So 120 with 3% split across 5 people. Let's press calculate, and we've got the same amounts as we've had before. Let's create something a little bit more realistic. Let's say this was 160 against 4 people, and we would like to supply a tip of 20%. Press calculate, and now we have a total bill of 192. The total per person is 48, and the total tip is 32. Let's say, for instance, we had less people. Let's say it was only an evening in with 2. Let's say the total bill came to something like 35, and the tip amount, we're going to bring this down to 15%. Press calculate, and now the total bill comes to 40. The tip amount is 5, and the total per person, therefore, is 20. If you found this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript course useful, then do let me know. Give it a thumbs up. If you've got a question about this course or other courses that I've got, please ask on our Discord server. Go to howtocodewell.net/Discord. Check out the other courses that I've got at howtocodewell.net. We cover things like Linux, Docker, PHP, JavaScript, CSS, pretty much anything to do with web development. And whilst you're at it, do subscribe to our YouTube channel for other courses and tutorials like this. Happy coding, everybody. See you again in the next course. Cheers. Bye.